And there's a season for each thing. And in the Christian tradition, this is the season of Lent. Traditionally, Lent lasted 40 days between Ash Wednesday and Easter, although to be fair, in different Christian traditions, it lasts anywhere from 40 to 46 days. For most, the holiday recognizes the time prior to Jesus' ministry when he went into the wilderness for 40 days and fasted and was tempted by materialistic and sensual pleasures. So first, I have to admit, I have to tell you, I am fascinated by numerology. The number 40 appears 178 times in the Bible. From the number of days of the rain in the flood story to the time it took to embalm a dead body, to the time Moses spent up in the mountain talking to God, to the number of years the Israelites spent wandering in the desert, to the number of days Jonah gave Nineveh before God's wrath would come upon them, to the number of years that both Solomon and David ruled. Really? Why 40? Some mathematicians have tried to be very creative with this, utilizing Fibonacci sequences and other mathematical regressions to explain it. It is amazing what people will spend their time on. Some astrologists believe it has to do with what the ancients believed to be the cycle of 40 years it takes Venus and the Earth to cycle the sun before they return to their original position. This is something from 1799, and you'll see right here in the center. Where is it? That goes. Anyway, right here, you'll see this is Venus's, or what at that time they believed the trajectory. You see it creates a little pentagram there. So, for whatever that's worth, or for whatever that means to anybody. Although I think, for me personally, I think for Christians, 40 is used to mimic Moses, to show it as a foreshadowing of Jesus' wilderness temptation. But in today's world, we're not just tempted, we are bombarded with materialistic and sensual messages just streaming out of our television all day, every day, 24 hours a day. So Lent for us maybe can be a time to take away from that, to take ourselves away from all the outward things that keep bombarding us, and to go inward to find what is meaningful to us and what can have meaning to us. Although in our modern times, I hear mostly, and I obviously did not grow up with this, but in our modern culture, I mostly hear, what am I giving up for Lent? That's a question that's asked. It's supposed to be something that you desire so that you will reflect on what meaning it really has to you. Twitter has actually summarized the top 100 items that people have posted that they are giving up for Lent, which in and of itself, it's a little scary that, of course, Twitter is analyzing what people are posting, but I do think it's interesting. So they list the top 10 things that people are giving up for Lent that they've posted on Twitter. Number 10, they are giving up coffee. This only applies, though, to non-fair trade coffee. I just want to make that clear to everybody. Number 9, fast foods. Number 8, sweets. Number 7, soda. Number 6, they're going to give up swearing. Number 5, they're going to give up social networking, which I'm going to tell you that would be impossible for me if you'd ever seen my Facebook page. So, number 4, alcohol. Number 3, people on Twitter, the number 3 most popular item they're going to give up is Twitter itself. Why don't they just give it up? Why do they have to write they're going to give it up? Just give it up. Number 2, which is I thought would be the most popular one that people are going to give up, is chocolate. Again, you only have to give up non-fair trade chocolate. So our booth downstairs is open during coffee hour to buy fair trade chocolate and coffee. And the number 1 thing that people in this country on Twitter are saying they are going to give up, and I think it is a sign that they are spending too much time on Twitter, is school, actually. That was pretty shocking to me. I guess the only way I can rationalize that is maybe that they really find school meaningful. I don't know. It just seemed kind of strange that people would want to give up school for Lent. But that's just me. Everybody makes personal choices in their life. The time of Lent asks us to focus particularly, though, on fasting, whether it be from food or from ideas or from ways of doing things. And so I find it interesting, actually, that almost all the world's religions have some sort of fasting and dietary restrictions as part of their religion. And in Islam, during the holiday Ramadan, Muslims feast from sunrise to sundown every day. During the Jewish high holy days, fasting is required. And if you were at our adult RE class, you would have heard about how the Hindus do not eat beef. Jainism and Buddhism promote vegetarian diets to preserve animal life. And both Islam and Judaism forbid eating pork. Although I can tell you we had in my household spare ribs almost every weekend. So I think that's an important point to recognize, though, even for myself, right? These are the orthodox rules of a particular religion that I'm talking about. And many people within those religions do not practice the food restrictions within those. Having grown up Jewish, as I said, I've always been fascinated with food rules. My grandparents kept a kosher household. They had separate plates for dairy products and for meat products, and you could not put meat on a dairy plate. So they had two sets of everything, two sets of silverware. And yet, even they bent the rules, right? When they went out to eat, they ate non-kosher foods. And so that was all as a youngster, that was all very confusing to me. And of course, in my household, we didn't keep kosher, so, and we still considered ourselves Jewish. So I think it is important to note that although there may be different rules in every different religion, how they are implemented are always different person by person. When I started seminary, I really actually studied the Jewish dietary laws in detail. And there are two academic threads that are pretty strong. One is that it was a situational necessity. At the time, the people were getting sick from eating certain types of foods, or secondly, the thought was it was a way to differentiate themselves from others, as a way to create a cohesive community. And growing up, I have to be honest, I really didn't understand that. What purpose did that serve in our world today? Of course, we're progressive, right? And so, based on new information, why do we do what we do? And I think that's always a good question to ask, no matter what religion. And because I found all religions are able to maintain a cohesiveness without food laws. But then I received my first inkling of how and why it can be important to have food laws. After going to a meditation retreat, a Buddhist meditation retreat, that included mindful eating. And this became a revelatory experience for me. So every meal we would sit in silence for about 30 minutes, which in and of itself, I have to tell you, that was very difficult for me. Just to be silent while we ate, because I grew up, right, around the kitchen table, everybody was discussing the politics of the day or what went on in our day, so food was always surrounded by a conversation in my culture growing up. But during this meditation retreat, we were encouraged to chew the food thoroughly, to taste it thoroughly. And by the end of chewing, it all felt like mush. All the food ended up tasting like mush after you chew it enough, Normally, we just tend to shovel the food in our mouths and don't even taste it at all. So I think what this taught me was to be intentional about what I was eating and to appreciate the food I was eating. It was a reminder to me that my body is sacred. This is the one body I have, and I should be careful as to what I put into it. And so this practice of mindful eating started me thinking that this was maybe the point of all of these food laws, to give us a discipline so that we will focus on what we put into our bodies. Dr. Adele Diamond, a professor of development cognitive studies, cognitive neuroscience at the University of British Columbia, writes about, and I quote, "The need for inhibitory control to stay on task when you're bored or when you meet initial failure. You need inhibitory control to focus in on something in the environment so that you're not overwhelmed by all the other things around. And being able to exercise discipline and keep at it and practice is much more important than IQ in determining our cognitive development throughout our lives." End quote. And I'm starting to think about many religions, right? There are disciplines of practice, whether it be prayer or meditation or food practices. And so I think historically, we can learn something that has been constant throughout the ages. Religious communities have found just the act of being disciplined in certain areas of our lives help our development in other areas of our lives. So discipline about food is just one example of how we can do that. And so I am sort of left pondering, right? What might an Orthodox Unitarian Universalist food restriction look like? Yeah, just the phrase, right? Orthodox Unitarian Universalism. That does not just, it sounds strange on the tongue, honestly. But I think really what I mean by that is if we lived out our values to the nth extent, right? What would that look like in our day-to-day lives? As an association, a number of years ago, we put forth an ethical eating statement of conscience that I think speaks directly to this issue. The statement starts, and I quote, "Aware of our interdependence, we acknowledge that eating ethically requires us to be mindful of the miracle of life we share with all beings. With gratitude for the food we've received, we strive to choose foods that minimize harm and are protective to the environment, consumers, farmers, and all of those involved in the food production and distribution." End quote. It does ask us, it gives specific recommendations to consume a more plant-based diet, one that is organic and locally grown, to purchase fair trade, certified products when possible, to call for labeling of genetically modified foods, to advocate for fair wages for workers and humane treatment for animals. It goes on to list about 20 more things which we don't have time to talk about here, about things that we can do individually and as a congregation, many of which our Green Sanctuary Social Justice Project has been and is working on. And just look at our garden, our giving garden that we have right on the grounds here. I think that is a statement of our values as a congregation. Of course, each person has very unique health challenges and needs, and we all should consider that when we make these decisions. But I encourage you to read the full statement, and it's a very long statement, but I encourage you to read it. Maybe you can do that for Lent, at UUA.org. It ends with this statement, which I really liked, and I'm quoting it, "With gratitude and reverence for all life, we savor food, mindful of all that has contributed to it. We commit ourselves to a more equitable sharing of Earth's bounty." End quote. And so I ask you to think about what you are willing to commit yourself to in regard to food justice. Perhaps giving up a favorite or unhealthy food for 40 days will help you focus on food justice. I do think some of our challenge with Lent, honestly, is that we like to be more positive about what we're going to do as opposed to giving something up. I mean, although it's merely a semantical issue, I think our society does not like the concept of giving things up. I remember reading a diet book. It insisted we shouldn't go on a diet because nobody wants to lose weight, right? Plus it also said, which I thought was pretty funny, the first 3 letters in diet is die. So, so for me, instead of giving up certain foods, I am going to accept new eating habits that will lead to a healthier lifestyle. So yes, maybe semantical, but it is our mindset. It's a positive, what we are going to do versus what we are not going to do. And so I think much of the same can impact our attitude towards Lent. People do not want to give up something. Of course, it doesn't have to be about food. It could be about any habit you have or ideas or ways of being. And it's just that food is the most common one that people talk about, honestly. So we need to focus, though, on what will allow us to live fully in the world. Right? As Thoreau said in Walden, I quote, "I want to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life," end quote. And so I invite you to take time this season of the year to specifically contemplate how you would like to live your life differently, so as to live to your highest standards. How would you change your life? What would have to be added to your life for that to happen, and what would you have to shed to make that happen? And by doing so for 40 days, perhaps it is a way to change the behavior to one that is more in line with your values. So I ask you over the next couple of weeks to take time and contemplate how you want to live your life. May it be so.